Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So on the agenda tonight, we have Jake E. Lee, and this is going to be coming from 1983 with Ozzy Osbourne, and they're going to be playing through Mr. Crowley. So let's get these guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here because that first solo section, just first of all, let's just say about Ozzy Osbourne, how many great guitarists has he actually worked with? He's had so much talent that he's worked with over the years, and Jake E. Lee is no exception to that, because the way that he's playing through, obviously, the Randy Rhoads original solo is one of those iconic solos that he doesn't stray too far from. And in order to do that, and to make it look as easy as Jake does, is so impressive, because Jake is nailing all the parts you want to hear, but he's got his own expression in there. He's got his own way of playing. In this particular video, the keys are quite high in the mix, which is great for the intro, and then for the rest of the track, obviously we're getting a really full sound here, but I think those keys could have maybe been taken down a little bit and might have just been this video mix or a TV mix if it was being shown on TV, because it'd be great to have Jake's guitar just a little bit higher in the mix so that we could really hear that solo. And having said that, if you do try and focus on that lead guitar sound, you can hear that the hammer-ons and pull-offs and the way that Jake plays it is really clear considering the amount of picking that's going on, because he's not doing alternate picking the whole time. So those hammer-ons and pull-offs are so clear. He's got that technique down so well in order to get them the same volume as picking, and that's what I always say, that you want to get your hammer-ons and pull-offs the same volume as you're picking, so then it gives you those artistic options that if you are low in the mix like this, you want everything to try and cut through and just be heard as much as possible. When I mentioned Randy Rhoads playing the original solo, it's interesting because you can draw some parallels with Jake, because Jake started playing piano at age 6, and that was his mum that wanted to get him into that, but that's because she was into classical music. His dad was actually into jazz, and his older sister was into pop music, and that's whose guitar he borrowed to actually start getting into guitar when he was 13. That's when he started picking up the guitar and playing. So having that classical influence and jazz as well as you'll know from Randy Rhoads, he is very much from that classically trained background and having those classical influences when he was learning to play. But with Jake, you can still see those influences in there in terms of the scales and the way that he throws it together, and having such a comfortable way of throwing these scales together, it just really does show that he's got that background. Something to mention about Jake's playing style is that having those influences of his mum's classical music, his dad's jazz, and his sister's pop means that he's listening to a lot of different genres, a lot of different styles, and a lot of different techniques he would have been getting down on the guitar. And that's certainly visible here, the way that he's going from technique to technique and never really stumbling over anything, and he doesn't have to change any thought process. It's all just natural, it just flows. Let's get back into the performance because we've got more soloage coming up. And there we have it. So, taking on that last solo, like I mentioned, it's almost like Jake has got this confidence and a swagger about his playing that is just, it puts you at ease because you don't feel like he's under pressure at any point, and he just gets it down so comfortably on the fretboard. It's not as if Jake's just sitting there, really concentrating on getting everything exactly right. He's just strutting around the stage and still having really impressive accuracy. Again, there's a really nice attention to detail that Jake has put in there, not just going AWOL on the solo, but tipping his hat to Randy Rhoads and that original solo that was there. Often when you've got another guitarist solo that somebody's trying to play that isn't as good as the original player or doesn't have the same stylizations and techniques, then it really does explode up in their face when they get on the fretboard trying to copy somebody else because they're not comfortable. Whereas in order to do this, to copy somebody else's solo who was originally an amazing player, to get down the same lines and the same expression is so difficult. Another interesting thing about Jake joining up with Ozzy Osbourne was that I think Ozzy was initially thinking of George Lynch to join up and play for him, but then he changed his mind and went for Jake. But if you don't know who George Lynch is, check out the videos on this channel of him, because I've covered him a few times. He was in Dokken and Lynch Mob as well. So it would have put a totally different spin on Ozzy Osbourne, because again, George Lynch, really top player, but a totally different style, totally different feel to Jake. And Jake was one of those guys, along with Bob Daisley actually, who was performing here as well, who wrote tracks, they wrote lyrics as well for the Bark at the Moon album. But the whole music industry side of it rears its ugly head again, because Sharon Osbourne said to Jake that he had to sign a contract that waived his, well, basically his publishing rights, his writing credits, basically anything that meant that he would get a royalty, which is when you've written a song, that's what happens. If it gets played on the radio, you receive a royalty, which is a payment in your bank account for having written that material. Whereas Sharon said that he had to sign a contract, which he did, because she threatened to sack him if he didn't sign this contract, which meant that all the earnings from the tracks that he did co-write, he wouldn't get any money from that. Jake actually co-wrote the title track to the album. So talk about getting a harsh deal, that you've actually co-written the title track of an album that goes on to sell over 3 million copies, by the way, in the US, and you don't get anything from those sales. You don't get your royalties. The other funny thing, well, it's not really funny, but the Bark at the Moon album, if you look at the credits, every song is credited to Ozzy Osbourne, regardless of all the instruments. Think of all the instruments on that album, the guitar solos, those rhythm parts. So effectively what that is saying is that Ozzy Osbourne played all the instruments, and he really composed all of those guitar solos, all of the drum fills, all of the keys, anything that's on there, Ozzy Osbourne did. And well, for me, I haven't seen Ozzy play a blistering solo, so for me there is a hell of a lot of input from musicians that didn't get credit on that album. Just while I'm on that album, a little fact, Tommy Aldridge played drums on that album, and that's the only studio album that he did with Ozzy, because the rest of the time he's just playing live. In fact, the other video that I've got with Ozzy and Randy playing lead, that is Tommy on drums there, so you can go back and watch that video if you want to see Tommy playing drums. Bob Daisley, very much in the same boat as Jake here, because I heard an interview with him recently where he said he's never going to be happy with the agreement that he's currently got, because he's got an agreement with the Osbournes about royalties and everything that he should be owed and the credits and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly, Jake had a contract written up before the Ultimate Sin album that the Osbournes had to sign to make sure that he would actually get a credit for writing a song. Anything that he wrote or co-wrote, he would have the publishing rights to that, so he could actually make money from the stuff that he was writing. It's a shame that the whole industry side of the music is one of the things that grabs the headlines, rather than just great music and great playing and everyone getting what they're owed for what they've put into a band. And this is the problem with musicians. I mention it in a lot of videos now, unfortunately, that musicians don't really know the industry of music. The management and the people that do understand how it works, they're the ones that are writing up the contracts and agreeing the publishing deals, and the musicians are often kept out of that loop. This is the problem about great musicians and great artists, is that they are creative. They make so much quality music that the people at the top who are controlling the contracts, the publishing deals, they are getting so much of this great music, great content. It's literally a goldmine for them, because they can write up those contracts, leave the musicians out of the loop. Another thing you'll find is that when a band becomes popular, the management can sometimes make a third-party publishing company, which means that all of the money coming from radio airplay is going to this publishing company, and it's not coming to the people that wrote the songs, which are the musicians. So the management now hold all of that money. They've got the pot of money that just keeps rolling in, and then it gets filtered down to the artists, and they decide how much the artists actually get. Of course, in this case, I know that the Osbournes do have their own publishing company. Back to Jake E. Lee, a great player with so many different influences when he was growing up, which meant that he got so many different styles down and techniques, and he could then really do a great version of that original Randy Rhoads solo. solo without murdering it like so many other players would do. But again, just a musician who hasn't got what he is due for the amount of work that he put in back in the day. But unfortunately, that is a common story in these kind of situations. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!